And from today, I hope we can build on the knowledge which we gained on Wednesday, but understanding a bit more about the waves. I will stop at the end of each section to open up any questions. So please feel free to just pause or to drop the questions in the group chat section and we can continue from there. All right, let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding our local conditions. In a place like Cape Town, which is so naturally and geographically unique, I find this a really interesting and intriguing topic to talk about. I think it's from my own experience of surfing around the Cape a bit. There's some really nice local insights and knowledge I'd like to share with you. But also, if you guys have anything which you've learned or experienced, please feel free to share it back with me and with us all here. As I mentioned, I hope that we can build on our knowledge of waves from that we learned on Wednesday, and to start understanding that these waves are affected and that they are really determined on a couple of variables, and these variables being things such as swell, types of swells arriving, the period, the direction and the size of these swells, the geography, all our beaches facing in different directions, and the wind and the tides and the type of surf breaks. And these all play a role in determining the type of waves which we're breaking at our shoreline for us to surf. So these are important variables to consider, and they're all a combination they all have a combining effect in determining what type of waves we'll be breaking. Okay, so swell, let's consider this as being unbroken waves rolling through the ocean. And as I mentioned, waves are determined by a combined effect of all the variables put together. Swell is probably considered to be the most important. Pretty much with no swell, there'll be no waves, and with no waves, there'll be no surfing. So swell is thus very important to give us a wave size and quality which we can get. We also learned on Wednesday that these swells are generated by winds far out to sea. So the wind blows across the ocean, it creates ripples, which will thus form into swells. These swells will begin to travel to our coastline, and they'll arrive as beautiful waves for us to surf. Of course, these waves are sometimes big and they are sometimes small, and this is obviously depending on the type of swell which brings them to our coastline. As much as we have different types of waves, we so too get different types of swells. We get ground swells and we get wind swells. We can compare and distinguish between these two swells clearly by their swell periods or the distance in which they've traveled. Swell period is a measurement of time between two individual waves breaking. I'll say that again. Swell period is the measure of time between two individual waves breaking, and it's measured in seconds. So pretty much if one wave were to break, counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the next wave breaks, we'd have a 6-second swell period. The swell distance is how far that swell has been generated out to sea and traveling to our coastline. Ground swells, these are generated far out to sea. They travel really long distances to arrive at our coastline, and because they have this more time and space to structure and organize themselves, they'll be coming in larger periods between one another. The swell periods normally around 10 seconds plus, and we'll see longer distances between the waves, a bit longer waiting period for the sets to come. Ground swells have a bit more power and they don't die off as quickly. Wind swells, these are generated by local wind patterns. They'll normally form and generate by the wind blowing close to the shore, have less time and space to develop and organize themselves, and will normally have swell periods of around 6 to 10 seconds. You will see the waves kind of a bit more on top of each other, and they'll be a bit more choppy and bumpy to ride, and they can often be less powerful and fade away quite quickly. Any questions on the swells so far? Please feel free to drop them in the group chats or unmute yourself and you can ask away. But just a point that we can surf on both the ground swells and the wind swells. Ground swells generally come with a lot cleaner conditions and better waves for us to ride on.
Shane, can I pop in there quickly?
Sure.
Just for the ladies especially, I just want to make clear, what Shane's talking, referring to the ground swell as, it doesn't, for surfers, we are looking always for the cleanest waves possible. So without chop, And when they're further apart, like that's because the swell's traveling further, much further, like sometimes thousands of k's or hundreds of k's, they have a lot more time to sort themselves out before they get to the shore, where the wind swells get generated quite close to shore, and that's why they haven't had time to sort themselves out. So when we're looking for surfers and bodyboarders or suppers, when we're looking for waves, we want that wave to be as clean as possible, and that's what the ground swell gives us, is a nice sorted out wave. And they're further apart, like Shane said. There's sometimes you have longer waiting periods between sets, but when they come, they're generally more powerful and generally much nicer to ride. Okay, that's
Cool. So everyone understands in that. Must say that I've got a timer on my screen here which says I've got 3:30 remaining time. I'm just going to have to see as we go along. I have made Anton host. Maybe I'll get kicked out, but I'll rejoin. If anyone else gets kicked off, please just rejoin if you can. I'm sorry if this is the case, just a bit of technical issues here. But yeah, we'll go on from here. Cool. So now, once the Swell arrives to Cape Town, this is of course where things get pretty interesting. As I mentioned, the Swell arrives in different sizes and directions, and this has a big effect on determining the type of waves which we will see breaking. I think for some of us in table view, maybe, of course in Cape Town, we know we have this Cape Peninsula, but this peninsula is sort of some far out big rock tourist structure thing that sits out the back of our city. But in the surfing world, this peninsula plays a really significant part in determining the type of waves which we'll be receiving on our coastline. We know the peninsula is scattered with many different beaches, and we can see from this photo that these beaches are all pointing in different directions. And we say when they're pointing in different directions, they have different orientations, or we say they have different beach aspects. So beach aspect is considered as the direction in which the beach is facing to. And we're going to see now how the swell directions and the wind directions play a huge role in this, in determining what type of waves and conditions we're going to be surfing on. Let's consider two really well-known spots in Cape Town, Muizenberg Beach and Big Bay Beach. Muizenberg Beach, we know to have an aspect or direction facing in a south to southeast direction. Big Bay Beach, we know to have an aspect or direction facing in a west direction. Okay, so we know Muizenberg Beach, we see it pointing in a south to southeast direction, Big Bay pointing in a more westerly direction. Okay, now as I mentioned, the swells arrive to Cape Town in different directions, and we can see how this peninsula might play an effect in the role of how the swells arrive at our coastline. Okay, swell direction is determined from the direction in which it comes from. Okay, so a south swell comes from the south. The north swell comes from the north and is traveling south. Much the same for southwest swells or south to southeast swells. Okay, I'm going to use an example to try and explain this better and for us to understand how these swells in the peninsula affects the waves which we see. All right, so it's after lockdown, we're stoked, we can go surfing now, and we see this 2-meter swell arriving into Cape Town. Okay, I make a call, I'm gonna go drive to Muizenberg. Brandon says, nah, he's gonna stay in table view and surf at Big Bay or something like that, maybe Melkbos, and we're gonna see how the waves come from there. So I get to Muizenberg, it's a nice early morning, and I see the waves are pumping. It's like head high, 2 meters plus, 6 foot in size, and the waves I can see are filtering directly into Muizenberg Bay. I call Brandon, and he tells me, yes, we're at Big Bay, it's like knee-high waves, I don't even think I'm gonna be able to surf. So I think back to my guide to surf forecasting, and I remember those aspects of the peninsula, the swell direction, and of course the aspect. I'll go back maybe a slide or two for those to catch up again. For anyone new, if you're
Shane,
joining,
I've got a question, dude. Can I ask?
yeah, sure.
So you've shown the direction of the waves coming onto the peninsula, right?
Sure.
Now, it's going to be one direction of coming to the peninsula, or you're going to have waves coming from the west to the east as well?
most certainly, exactly that. Sometimes we have south swells, sometimes we have swells coming more from the southwest. And we're going to see now coming up, of course, if it's coming more from the west, it's coming more direct into Big Bay or into this western peninsula. Kind of hard for the swell to be able to wrap around into Muizenberg. It's coming more from the south, it's coming more directly into Muizenberg, and a bit more hard for it to wrap into the Big Bay side. Hope that answers your question. But the swells, it's all depending on how it's generated out to sea. Of course, if we have a front which is developed more on the western side, probably going to see swell arriving on a more west angle. So the more west the swell, the more exposed the west coast is, the more south the swell, the more exposed the southern peninsula is.
And then would the southern peninsula have right waves, and then the west peninsula have left waves?
Not necessarily. That's depending on the beach setup. And I mean, that exactly. Depends on how the beach is set up. Most these breaks here are all beach breaks. So the waves will be breaking left and right, depending on how it's arriving onto the coast and where the sandbanks are setting.
Got it.
Cool. Okay, I hope everyone's back on. Again, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, just let's go on. So this section here again, like I was saying, the peninsula, the swell direction, and the aspect or the direction the beach is facing plays a very vital role in determining the type of waves which arrive at our coastline. So of course, as I've mentioned, at Big Bay, which has an aspect of west facing, we know waves which are coming from the west have a more direct access and will thus bring us bigger waves to break. Waves here at Muizenberg, we know the beach is facing south. So any swell coming from the south comes straight into the peninsula, comes straight into this bay here, and the waves will probably be bigger than it would be at Big Bay. Maybe a bit higher up on the west coast, you could see the swell being able to wrap in a bit more, but for it to be able to wrap on this fine angle here would be really hard for the south kind of swell to get into the Big Bay region. Cool. Any questions on swell direction on the peninsula, how it affects the waves due to the swell? Please feel free to drop them in the group chat, or you can ask away.
When you personally do your sort of analysis, do you have a look at the map like this, or would you go on to like one of the different sort of like wave forecast sites and see sort of like wave direction, swell, all that stuff?
Of course, we have different types of sites and forecasting ways of doing it. You can be using more complex methods of ocean buoys out to sea, having more time and like accuracy in predicting it, or just basic Wind Guru or Magic Seaweed shows us all this information. So this is a Google map here, which has just been screenshot out. I would be able to know the swell direction by looking at Wind Guru, for instance, and then I would look at a map, or like in my head, I can understand a map as such that if anything I see on Wind Guru with the westerly swell, I'm thinking more on the western peninsula. Anything with more of a south swell, I'm thinking of waves or beach spots here which have a bit more south-facing directional openness. And even waves here you can see on the Cape Peninsula side, which are more exposed to south swells, we can see more being able to wrap into different bays as such. So a combination of two like that.
What?
Shane, can I just say something very quickly?
Sure.
There's guys that's very technical about it, like Shane says. They look at the
Just listen. Not there to play around.
Can you mute him?
It's fun.
Daddy,
Anyway, so most of the very technical guys look at like Shane said, the boys out at sea, and the average person like myself, I'll look at I normally look at a thing called Wind Guru, and some people do look at the combination of that, and there's Magic Seaweed. So, but if you stick with one and you start looking at the conditions every time you see it, okay, it's a 2-meter swell and it's southwest, then you can get a rough idea next time you see it without seeing the wave, what what the size is going to be roughly. But so there's very easy apps these days that will help, and understanding the direction is just meaning that if you're going to see if it's going to miss us, if we get a south roll, then we know it's going to be missing most of us on this side, on the west coast here. Okay.
Cool.
Okay, Shane. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So another variable which we were considering is wind. Okay, and for surfers, wind is sort of a blessing and a curse. Out to sea, we want the wind to blow to be able to create ripples and thus being able to create swell, which then forms waves for us to surf. In our local environment, we want as little wind as possible because we know that wind can chop up and sort of make the waves a bit more bumpy. However, not all winds are bad for surfing, and this also depends on the direction and the strength in which it's blowing. So we know as surfers that offshore winds are preferred. Offshore winds are winds which blow from the land to the sea. Onshore winds are winds which blow from the ocean onto the land. Cross-shore winds are winds which blow across the shore. As I mentioned, offshore winds are preferred in surfing, as these winds are able to blow into the face of the wave. They groom them and clean them really nicely, so when they break, they have a nice shape and form for us to ride. Onshore winds can often bump up and chop the wave, which make it pretty difficult for surfing. And again, this peninsula plays a vital role in determining what type of winds are preferred for each spot. For instance, at Muizenberg Beach, we know this is a south-facing beach or south-southeast facing beach. Any winds which are coming from the north or the northwest region, we know are blowing offshore from land to sea, and they can be considered as offshore, they are offshore winds and make the wave really nice and clean. At Big Bay, however, we see the direction it's facing is west. So any winds coming from the eastern coast or the eastern peninsula, we see from the eastern direction, we see will be offshore, cleaning the waves, making them nice for riding. Okay. And of course, there's there are other factors to consider, like if you have a pier or if you have big buildings too, they can also block the wind from reaching into a cove. Like Big Bay can be really sheltered from the wind because of the big Eden on the Bay structures and the buildings around. So the buildings and natural structures do play an important part in blocking the wind and coming. Another interesting fact about the wind in Cape Town is that, of course, in summer we all know and are victim to that really horrid southeast wind which can blow. An indicator we know is, of course, the tablecloth on Table Mountain. This southeast wind blows in many tourists and other people from all around the world to come and kite surf and to windsurf at our shoreline. But it doesn't only have an important role in that, it has a very significant role in our water temperature, which we receive in the summer versus the winter. So as I mentioned, in summer, our trade wind comes from the southeast. At Big Bay Beach, this means it blows cross to offshore. In winter, we know the wind comes from the northwest, meaning blows cross to onshore. So let's consider a situation in summer. The wind is light for a couple of days. The water is able to settle in this sort of basin. The sun heats the water up and the water becomes a bit warmer. Now a week of southeast comes to blow. It blows cross to offshore really strong for the next week. It blows all that surface water back out to sea, that warm water which has just been created back out to sea, and brings from below the colder Atlantic water back to the surface. And that's why we have such cold waters in Cape Town in the summer, well, at least at Big Bay on the western coast here. It's because of this process of upwelling, the consistent blowing away of the warm water which is being trapped in this basin. In the winter, of course, the northwest, as I mentioned, blows as the trade wind, and this traps in water into this basin. The sun's able to heat the water up and settle it, and then we'll see warmer water generally. So that's just an interesting fact about why we have warmer water in winter, for instance, and colder waters in summer. Cool. Any questions on the wind and those kind of factors?
I have a question, Shane. So the winds obviously can play facts in creating nice waves and bad waves, but do the winds also change the tides? You know, if there are bigger winds and cleaner waves, does it not make stronger tides pushing you outwards?
Tide as in current or tide as in
Current.
currents? Wind can cause movements of water and currents, yes, for sure. I wouldn't say that that's the only factor in causing a current. If there's deeper water, if it goes from sand to a deeper water drop-off section, that can also cause current because water moves to where there's less resistance, and the wind can also create that current to be stronger. That makes sense.
Got it.
Someone asked about light versus strong winds and to put them in categories and which is tolerable to surf or to stay at home. I think this is sometimes tough to understand the strength of the wind. And of course, offshore winds are great for surfing, but if it's 25 knots of offshore wind or 25 kilometers per hour of offshore winds, this is not really nice for surfing. Surfing between 10 to 15 knots is preferred. And if I could say that in English, not knots or kilometers, I would say if you can see the waves are still pretty clean, if you look at the waves and they're not clean and chopped up and there's not a whole lot of backwash flying off the back, it's pretty safe for surfing. And of course, it's just if you see a lot of kite surfers out and it's not really pleasant for surfing, then that's your own decision. But normally around 10 to 15, maybe 20 if you're lucky, depending on the wave, is okay for surfing. And of course, the direction plays a big role in that too.
Can I just butt in there quickly, Shannon? The strength of or different spots handle wind differently. If you go to Table View, it will be very susceptible. So the big open beaches like Table View will be affected a lot quicker by wind than Big Bay, for example, because you've got the rocks and so on. If you've got a southeast, it will protect it more. But some places like J Bay and Elands Bay, they can handle a lot more swell wind. It actually, some spots actually gets better when the wind is strong because it holds the wave up, and that's when you'll get more barrel rides. So J Bay, Elands Bay, those places can handle a lot of wind, where Table View, for example, can't handle a lot. So it depends on the actual spot and the situation and the direction as well.
Cool. Another factor for us to consider, which has a huge effect on the type of waves we see, is tide. So tide is basically the alternate rising and falling of the ocean. This is caused by the gravitational forces of the moon and the sun and the earth's rotation all together. We sometimes get low tides and we sometimes get high tides, and these happen every 6 hours. Every day these tides shift out 1 hour each day. So guys, the tide is, we get low tides and we get high tides, and this changes every 6 hours. Okay, in full moon or new moon cycles, we get a thing called spring tide. And this is where we see really extreme tides. We get really high tides and very low tides. And we'll see large differences between these tides, of course. In a neap tide or a standard moon period, we'll see less differences between a higher tide or a moon tide. In surfing, the tides have quite a significant effect on what type of waves will be breaking. If you think to spots such as Doodles or Muizenberg or Big Bay, for instance, we can maybe relate that on lower tides, we'll see a bit more hollow and easy to catch waves, and maybe even a bit steeper, and on the higher tide, a bit more hard to catch waves and flat type of waves. On lower tides, of course, the water is shallower where the waves are breaking. So it gives it a bit more surface area for the waves to break and a bit more traction to pick up, jack itself up and break harder. For the higher tides, of course, the water is deeper where the waves are breaking, making it a bit more gentle and harder to catch the waves. In Cape Town, we have a lot of beach breaks, predominantly beach breaks. So these, in my experience, they normally work best in lower to mid tides, as it has this effect of being able for the waves to break easier. Of course, this is different for each spot, and it takes a bit of time and experience to know which tide is best for your surfing spot. And sometimes you have sandbanks which form really shallow, and sometimes a big swell can wash away sandbanks. The tide doesn't always play the same role every single time you go surfing. Always just be aware of what the tide is on a particular day, maybe reference it back to the day before, and you can kind of get an understanding of how the tide is playing an important effect on the wave which is breaking in front of us. Cool. Any questions on the tide before we go on? Awesome. Okay. So our last variable for today in understanding how it affects the waves is the type of surf breaks we'll be surfing at. Okay, in Cape Town, we have predominantly beach breaks which are breaking. Think of places like Big Bay or Muizenberg or Doodles again, or Dadestian. Okay, these are generally sand bottom beaches and waves which break over sand bottom. Okay, at these beach breaks, we'll normally see left-handers breaking or right-handers breaking, and this just depends on the setup of the beach. Most of the beach breaks in Cape Town have 2 directions of waves, which is obviously dependent on how it's set up, and we get different types of waves at every beach break. We know Muizenberg or Big Bay to be quite beginner friendly, but somewhere like Llandudno or maybe even Dadestian and Shore Break can be quite heavy hollow waves. And as I mentioned before, this is all depending on the setup of the beach, how the sand has been deposited, and how the waves are breaking over that sand. For point breaks, these are generally formed where there's a headland that sticks out into the ocean. The waves are able to wrap around the headline and break on the inside. We'll normally see these waves breaking in one direction. So for instance, here in Elands Bay, we'll see left-hander waves breaking. For a spot like Jeffreys Bay, we'll see right-hander spots breaking. Point breaks are really nice to surf as they kind of give you this long open wall waves to ride, which is really cool. And I think some of my favorite waves to ride. Sorry, someone's audio is going on here. They give a nice, really long open face for us to ride on and a nice little channel for us to paddle out to. And points, of course, as I said, will generally break in one direction, either being a left-hander such as Elands Bay or right-hander such as in Jeffreys Bay. Sorry. Okay, another type of surf spot is a reef break. Okay, reef breaks, of course, is either breaking over a coral reef or a rock reef. Okay, in Cape Town, the water is a bit cold for coral to live and survive. So we have 1 or 2 sort of rock reef breaks which we have, such as Cork Bay as we see here. And this obviously, the type of waves breaking here are completely dependent on how the reef is structured and set up. Okay, so swells can arrive to this reef, and they can kind of jack and form different types of waves. Here at Cork Bay, it's almost like a slab. It's a square flat reef. As the swell arrives, it hits this flat reef and it jacks up and forms this really hollow type of wave. I've been fortunate to surf some reefs which are huge surfaces. They may be like 100 meters wide and 50 meters long, and waves and swells are able to come into the shore. They're able to hit this reef, and it almost creates this mechanical wave. So the wave before is almost going to be exactly the same as the wave after, and it breaks normally on the spot X, exactly where you want to sit, which is really nice and fun for surfing. It's pretty cool. So don't always think if it's a reef break that is dangerous. You can get some really cool reef breaks to surf around the world, which are really easy and beginner friendly to surf on. So always just be aware that it's not fixed, that it can change, and it's all depending on the structure of the actual reef. Cool, another type of wave, which we get pretty much quite a few of these on our Eastern Cape in South Africa, is river mouths. And this is where the river flows back out into the ocean and deposits sand for the waves to break over. So as I mentioned, the river flows back into the ocean, it deposits sands, and waves are able to break over this. These spots, I can kind of say they're quite fickle, always depending on how the sand is formed. So when the sand is shallower, of course, you might get hollower waves. Sometimes a big swell pushes that sand away, and then it'll make a bit of a deeper little trench for the waves to break, making them a bit gentler and a bit more pup, as we say. Of course, these spots can be quite tide dependent, as on lower tides, maybe you can't even surf it because it's too shallow for surfing, or it doesn't even break. And on higher tides, maybe it forms some really nice waves. We've got quite a few of these on our Eastern Cape, such as in Coffee Bay or as in Mdumbi. And these river mouths have some really awesome waves for us to ride. They create like these natural sand bottom point breaks, which are super fun to surf on, which is cool. Yeah, any sort of questions on how breaks work depending on the surf on how it's set up, from point breaks to beach breaks to reef breaks and river mouths. Okay, cool.
And can I just say something there to the people? If you look at a place like Cold Bay Reef, which is a reef break, it will mainly be, it will always be, or most of the time, it will be very similar in where the wave will break. Maybe it gets affected a little bit by the swell direction, but the reef will stay the same. So the bottom is staying the same. So the wave is going to stay more or less in the same place. If you go to beach breaks, however, the bottom and the bank's changing all the time, and that's affecting every day. It's changing a little bit on how, where it's going to break, which way it's going to break, and so on. So if you get a good bank, that bank can stay there for 4 or 5 days or a week or whatever, or sometimes maybe just even a day. But because the banks move around a lot, so a point break and reef breaks still stay similar, and the banks of the beach breaks changes all the time. That's why it looks different here. It's Big Bay, Cable View area. Okay, cool.
And at these beach breaks, we get things called A-frames, which is showing that the waves can be breaking on one peak in the left and right direction. So for instance here, maybe the peak was out here, and we can see this wave is broken in the right direction and the left direction for surfing to be taking place on. Okay, so that's all the content of the guide for part 2. I would like to just go back and touch on the points which I found very important, and I think which is important to understand if you ever got confused in why is the wave small here or big there, and why is the wind offshore here and offshore there. Always go back to this sort of map in your head, understanding this peninsula, this term of aspect, the direction the beach is facing, and then the direction of the wind or the swell which is affecting that. So as we said here at Big Bay, we're facing in a west direction. Any wind or swell which blows from the west is going to be directly coming into Big Bay. For Muizenberg, it's facing a south to southeast direction. Anything coming from the south or from the south to southeast is coming directly into that bay. Offshore winds at Muizenberg come from the northwest. Offshore winds at Big Bay come from the east. Just something to always be aware of and to be observant of when you get to the beach. And I think this observation of waves and setup is important to understand. And forecasting can be easy if you just look at Magic Seaweed and you see 5 stars and that's awesome, I'm going to go surfing. But once you start understanding the setup and the dynamics of the spots, it's a bit easier to really know why these type of waves are forming here. And then you can use a comparison of technology to observation and use that in your practice further. So on Tuesday, I did mention we'll be doing part 3 tomorrow and Saturday, but I'm going to do that next Tuesday just to have a bit more time between the spots. So I will post the links and the times and stuff after this. I hope that this recording will go through after the little hiccup earlier, but yeah, it's been awesome to hear from some of you and to share some stuff. There's some more questions here which I'm going to answer. Where would be the best place to paddle out at an A-frame? At an A-frame break? This obviously depends. Not every spot has an A-frame break. You can get beach breaks which break in right directions. For instance, if I look at Malkbos, tube wave breaks in the right direction, but then if you just go 20 meters to the left, you get an A-frame, which is breaking left and right. This is obviously depending on the setup of the beach and the direction in which the swell is coming. If the swell comes too directly into a particular beach, it might close off the right-handed breaking. And it might make it better for the left-hander. If it's coming from a more west direction, maybe we'll see a more southwest direction, maybe we would see more left-handers breaking just because of the direction of the swell. Okay, another question here is, how much does tide impact Muizenberg? My opinion, it affects it quite a lot. On higher tides, you'll paddle out and it's pretty hard to catch the wave. On lower tides, you can kind of see the swell has a bit more traction to be able to break over the shallower water, and the waves will be a bit longer and cleaner to ride. And of course, on spring tides, this has a bit more of a significant effect. if it's a spring low tide at Muizenberg, you might have to paddle really far out to catch the waves, because you'll see that there's a lot of beach, as in terms of there's a lot of sand and the waves are breaking a bit further out. And if it's a high tide, maybe it's touching all the way up to the pillars, and the waves will be breaking right on the beach here. So tide has a big effect on Muizenberg. Lower tides are generally better for longer rides. Cool.
Can I say something about that paddle out, Shane?
Yeah.
For the slightly less experienced people that arrive at the beach, it's very important to look at the setup when you get to a spot. And if it's a new place, always look at the conditions, and then also look what other surfers are doing, where they paddle in and out. For me, that is a very important thing. When you get to a new spot, especially if it's a rocky beach, look where the people go. You will see the surfers will normally go to certain places. We call it, in some places we call it keyhole, where there's a like rock and there's this like little channel in the rock. And the locals will know where to do. So watch the locals and follow them. And also look which is very important, see where they come back to shore as well, where they come out. And then if you look at the A-frame wave, you'll normally see there will be normally a bit of a channel where you can also see that the people will paddle out. So you don't really want to paddle straight into the peak. You want to paddle to the left or the right of the peak. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions or any insights someone else has?
There's a question about the perfect conditions for Muizenberg, Shane.
Okay, do you want to answer that, Brandon?
Yeah, so I would say the perfect conditions for Muizenberg, South Swell, obviously, as Shane explained, as it's a southeast facing beach. 2-meter waves around there. You don't want it to be too big, as it picks up quite a bit of swell if it's south swell, and northwest wind. Don't want it to be too strong, so around 10 to 15 knots, as Shane said, is manageable. And a low tide, as it would be breaking further out and a bit more punch in the wave, because the tide is lower, so the shallower banks. And yeah, so that would be my ideal surfing conditions for Muizenberg. And the morning time, obviously, as everyone, the early bird gets the worm.
Yeah, Muizenberg's a pretty crowded beach sometimes to surf at. So just to add to what Brandon was saying, is that south swells are preferred, and of course the northwest wind is preferred too. But I've had situations where it's been a pretty southwest swell. It's a swell coming from the southwest, which has been about 3 meters. But because it's quite a big swell from the southwest, it's still able to trickle in a bit of swell which wraps in. And it's maybe a light northwest wind. So making it still offshore conditions and really nice small waves that you can ride. And that depends on what type of waves you want to catch too. If you want to be shortboarding, of course, you're looking for 2 meter plus south swells. If you want to be on the longboard or on the SUP or on the foil or something, you may be looking for 1.2 to 1.8 meter little south swells, or even a big southwest swell, which kind of has to wrap around the whole peninsula to arrive here at Muizenberg. Would you guys do the showing how to read wind guru and wave forecast? So on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we're going to be going through the different technologies of wind guru and using those forecasts and technology forecasts to be able to predict the surf, so that we can preempt when we're going to go surf and understand that it's going to be offshore here, or good waves here, or bad waves there, for instance. That's happening on Tuesday, 10 a.m.
Lee's asking a question: where is the perfect place to go away for a newbie?
Away for surfing?
I think if you go
Western Cape area.
Can I answer that for Shane? It depends where you want to go, Lee. If you want to go to in the Western Cape, close to us, Arniston is quite nice. It's not great waves, but a really nice place to go to. Arniston, and if you can get a little bit further, Seal Point is an amazing place for actually all levels, and family as well. So it offers a lot for like total beginners to more expert level as well. And you've got J-Bay just around the corner. Any other spots that you can think of, Shane or Brandon?
Yeah, I think I just want to like maybe answer it in a bit of a different way. And that when we travel for surf, it's sometimes we have this expectation to catch waves and to get different types and to have this expectation met. But of course, when we're dealing with the ocean, the conditions can be different every time. So maybe you book yourself a weekend away to Steel Point, but it's the biggest swell of the year which arrives there. So then it's not going to be so good for surfing. Maybe you book yourself a weekend away to go to Betty's Bay, for instance, which has some awesome waves for beginners if it's the right conditions. So of course it depends on the conditions where to go, but spots to answer this question is somewhere, I would say, from Arniston to places like Betty's Bay, even places like in the South Peninsula. If you're able to get down to Long Beach or Scarborough side, it's a beautiful region and there's some awesome waves to catch. Otherwise on the West Coast here, maybe somewhere like Azefontein, there's a nice little beach break there. And a bit further up, you can find maybe one or two little waves to catch, even Paternoster if the swell is right for that, or depending, of course, on the swell conditions and the ocean conditions.
There's JR is asking about Wind Guru.
Yeah, I answered that one already.
Oh,
Yeah. Someone asking a question there.
no, I think it's Jaylene talking in the background.
Okay.
Shane, I've got a question.
Sure.
Cool. So taking all this information and put it into like practical spaces where we're going for a surf, right? Now, every time I've gone for a surf, I end up in the washing machine, right? Big time. So
Awesome.
how is the best way to determine to actually like get out to the waves where they're surfable?
Yeah.
You know, like we spoke briefly last time about that if you do get taken by a big wave, that the best way is to swim down and to throw your surfboard to the side.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how do you like manipulate your surfboard to go under the waves, and when you go over the waves and actually find your path to get to the back line where you can surf?
Okay. So Dave, I think this is a really good question and a really important thing that surfers sometimes forget about, or at least beginner surfers aren't necessarily shown when they start surfing. And that's the thing of timing. And timing comes with observation. Okay. So there's different types of timing. And of course, timing is very essential in surfing. Say, for instance, you get to the beach and you see huge sets coming in. Okay. If you're going to go try paddle out into that, it's probably going to go into the washing machine. However, as we know that the sets are not always consistent, that there's sometimes things such as lulls where there's a bit of break between the waves. If you just wait for those moments to paddle out, it will probably make your life a lot easier. So timing is important in that way. And so too when you're trying to catch the waves. If you're trying to paddle too early, if your timing is too soon, maybe the wave's going to crunch and break on your back. If you're going to pause and let the wave come to you and you're going to paddle at the right time, you're probably going to catch the wave of your life instead of going into the washing machine. That makes sense. Does it answer your question, Dave?
Yeah, so it does answer my question. And then also, like, how do you determine when you go underneath the wave to get past it or over the wave? Because generally, like, what happens is I try to get over the wave and then it catches me on top, and then you know what's up.
Again, comes to timing. If the wave is a whitewater coming to you, if there's a set measurement, it's probably about a meter or so to do a duck dive or to swim underneath it. If you see that you're going to scrape over it over the top, you just got to paddle hard enough to make sure that you don't get caught in the lip and go over the falls. That's probably something which maybe you've done, is that you're paddling over and you stop as you get to the top, and because there's still power in the wave, it pushes you over, and over the falls you go.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of YouTube videos about duck diving and so on. What size board are you using, Dave?
I don't even have my own board, so whatever board's available.
You rental, you total newbie.
No, yeah, bro, I'm from Joburg. I've got no waves to practice on.
Okay, so the whole thing is like Shane says, timing. But eventually, when you surf a bit more, you'll start doing what they call duck dive. But there's a few ways to get either under the wave or over it. And like if you have a bigger board, generally what you probably be surfing now is there's a thing called turtle roll, where you roll over and you roll and lie under the board and pull, and the wave go over you, and then you pop over some of them, and then you duck dive under some of them. But that comes with experience, and if you go to somebody like Shane and Brandon, they can actually help you a lot with that, and it will reduce your frustrations a lot if you just get 1 or 2 sessions like that.
Awesome, great, thank you.
Cool, guys. We've got about 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. Any questions from here we can try answer. Otherwise, we're going to be cut off again. It's been really nice to have some questions and to hear from others, and to share this insight with anyone who's had trouble with it before.
Shane, quick question. I've sort of been surfing for a long time, but I'm not great. Never had a lesson or anything like that. And just listening to you, there just feels like there's a lot of stuff which could accelerate my learning process. Who is best for like mid-level surf coaching, training, that type of thing? Like, is there a good guy you could think of, or surf school or whatever?
So of course we offer these sessions through our packages and through our offerings, from all levels of surfing, from beginners to advanced. And of course we try and cater these sessions for the individual surfer, for beginners, sticking with beginners and trying to understand the waves a bit more. And then for intermediate advanced, really trying to work on timing and positioning in the lineup, taking this further. We offer this at the Atlantic Surf School.
Atlantic Surf School, yeah.
Or Atlantic Surf Company. You can find us here along at Coral Road in Big Bay or Tableview region. I did leave my email there. Otherwise, you can just find us online, or you can get in touch with me, and I can give you some further details.
And where would you do your lessons? Like at Doodles or something like that?
Yeah, depending on the surf too, and depending on what suits you. Sometimes we go to Muizenberg if that's it, but generally at Doodles, Big Bay, or Calmers, or wherever it suits best.
Okay. So I can just put me on that email address.
Shane is just being humble here. Him and Brandon are very good coaches, so I could really recommend trying them to go with him for a lesson or 2.
Awesome, thanks. And this was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, JR. Nice to have you. Cool, guys. I think we're going to be cut off soon. Any last questions? You're welcome to message me, anything as such. Sorry again for the technical stuff. I think Zoom's 40 minutes things are quite stringent on us. But I hope we learned something new today, and can now apply this for the next time we go surfing next week, which is